I wanted to start by telling you two reasons why I got involved with this wonderful charity. And they're reasons that predate me joining and were very much connected to my last role. About 4 or 5 years ago, two things happened in my career that had quite a profound effect on me. The first was that a young man who I'd done a great deal of work with in a previous life had rather tragically killed somebody very close to him. And I don't know if you've ever been involved in that kind of situation in your professional life where you start to question the things that you may or may not have done that could have maybe prevented that situation. It's really uncomfortable to be there. And after I'd gone through all the different permutations and was still worried about it, I was lucky enough, given my state of mind, to be reading some of the reports from the court that day. And I'll never forget the remarks of the defending barrister who said that if anybody could have seen the lack of love and care that was given to this young man in his formative years, they'd have been left in little doubt that the tragic circumstances of events that we helter-skelter to in court that day could have been a possibility in his life. A possibility. And it made me realise at that point, in one absolute flash of certainty, that the only thing that I could have done that would be different was to have invented a time machine and gone back 25 years or so in this person's life and either worked alongside his family, or much more likely him, at the earliest possible stage in his life to make a difference. And in that difference there is a chance that I may have been able to have avoided the catastrophic series of events that happened, destroying other people's lives and his much later in time. That was the first event. If before that I knew early intervention was important, by this point I knew it was absolutely certain. The second point was not too long after that. I had the misfortune to have to go down to our local hospital, or went on call one night because somebody that we were supporting had tried to commit suicide. And I got very involved over the next 12 months in how this person was doing. And I have to say that despite my efforts and the work of some wonderful local professionals, we were no further advanced in 12 months' time than we'd been that night in our local hospital in terms of getting this person to start to re-engage with her life, to start to understand some of her responsibilities both to herself and as a young mum. And we were pulling our hair out, actually, as a group of professionals. At that time, a group of volunteers got involved in the work of my organisation, didn't think too much of it. It was a fairly regular occurrence for us, but one of those volunteers had previously been in a very similar experience to the mum I'd met in hospital. She'd been through experiences of domestic violence. She could empathise with that. She'd been a young mum herself at the time. And she did more in the next 6 months than the rest of us had done in the previous 12 to get this mum to start to take some personal responsibility for herself, to begin to realise the possibilities that were there in her life, both to herself and to her children, and crucially, to get this mum to begin to re-engage with those of us that we felt could make a wider contribution to her future. You may be there already, but what I found out later was that that mum was a Home Start volunteer. That volunteer, was a Home Start volunteer in her spare time. And it was my first experience of the quite genuine transformative change that Home Start's volunteers make on families up and down the UK. And not just on all families, but families who are going through some quite extraordinary challenges in their lives. And so putting the two together, when the opportunity to come and join this organisation came up, I felt early years, absolutely. Volunteer-led support, I see the difference it makes. I'd like to be part of that. And I'm so proud to have made that decision, because actually everything I've seen in the subsequent year and a half tells me that this is an organisation that doesn't just deliver for the one person that I met, but delivers for thousands and thousands of families right across the whole of the UK, and as I'll tell you in a moment, across other parts of the world as well. But it's really important to be clear about that difference that we make. If you look at all of the evidence that you and we collate relating to the work that our volunteers do, that our Home Starts do right across the UK, some things start to be abundantly clear. First, our reach is really quite significant. Nearly 35,000 families were supported by Home Start volunteers across the UK last year. They had nearly 70,000 children, many of whom also benefited from the great support that their families received from Home Starts. Nearly 20,000 volunteers taking the form of trustees, frontline volunteers, home visiting volunteers, people working in our charity shops, were also part of our offer to families last year. And we work as an organisation, as a federated network of organisations across 70% of local authority areas right across the UK. That's a really significant footprint. And we deliver some wonderful results. So take a look at Home Start's latest social impact report that is based on all of the data collection that you have done as an organisation over the last few years. And you'll see that Home Start is actually delivering something really quite important in terms of improvements to parental outcomes. If you look at the difference that families tell us we are making through our volunteers to improved parenting confidence and well-being, especially when families are dealing with mental ill health and the challenges of conflict around the home, you see actually that our volunteers are doing something quite exceptional. If you look at what families tell us is happening in terms of improvements to their parenting skills through their involvement with a Home Start volunteer, that too is really significant. And they also tell us that Home Start volunteers help them to better manage their home affairs. And the longer we work with families, of course, they begin to tell us that they see outcomes improving for their children as well. And when you start to think that that's across 35,000 families and 70,000 kids across the UK, you can begin to see that the footprint is really quite extraordinary. But it doesn't just stop there, because if you were to ask our volunteers, what does volunteering for Home Start mean for you? I suspect most of them would come to you quite intuitively and tell you about how it had led to improvements in their confidence, in their work readiness, in their ability to contribute to their communities. And if you read the latest report from Home Start, which is based on a pilot that we did in London, talking about the difference of volunteering with Home Starts on volunteers themselves, you can see that volunteers in that study were saying exactly those things to us. They were saying that volunteering with us really helped improve their skills, their parenting understanding, their knowledge about family life. It improved their well-being and confidence. And for those volunteers who came into that study because they wanted to volunteer with Home Start to look for work, by the end of it, they weren't quite so interested in looking for work. And I'm absolutely certain that if we go back and ask them, that's because they found it and are continuing to volunteer with Home Start afterwards. It's a really impressive added value that we bring as a sequence of organisations to families and volunteers and kids right across the whole of the UK. And we need to understand that we do that at tremendous value for money. So if I go back to my previous role, where we were involved in providing crisis support for homeless men and women and families at a stage in their life when things had gone very, very badly wrong, we would be talking about investing sums of money, anything up to £40,000–45,000 a year, to begin to be able to make a difference. And if you were to ask those families and men and women that I supported, most of them would probably say, if they're being honest, Rob, a lot of this started when I was at home. not necessarily because my family didn't love me, but because when things got tough, my family didn't necessarily have the agency, the cash, or the resilience to do anything about it. And wouldn't it be nice if they'd have said that you could have found that time machine and gone back and helped me and my family before it all started to go wrong? What does it cost Home Start to provide that time machine? £26 per family per week. And I think that figure is falling thanks to the tremendous value for money that people are putting into that effort right across the whole of the UK. Now, I know which I'd prefer to spend, £45,000 after it had all gone horribly wrong, or £26 per family per week to put it right before the problems start to escalate at an early age. So let's celebrate not just the fact that we deliver tremendous social good as a network of organisations. Let's realise that we do it at tremendous value for money and that we make a contribution to the way that society supports families and vulnerable people that is truly significant and worth its weight in gold in terms of what we are able to bring to the table in terms of local partnerships and our contribution to local family support. And just think that this is a group of organisations that has grown exponentially in size over the past 40 years. You think back to the origins of Home Start, on the back of a estate not a million miles away from my home in Leicester, and that developed a wonderful home visiting family support service in my hometown, and then began to export that idea out to different parts of the East Midlands, and then was challenged by the London Law Trust to think, well, actually we could go national here. And on the back of that challenge became one of the fastest growing social franchises, bar none, in the UK. Getting towards a point where today we can talk about an organisation that has that reach I mentioned a few moments ago. Just to re-emphasise it, 35,000 families, 70,000 kids, 20,000 volunteers, a collective turnover of around £35 million, 70% of local authority areas that we are working in, and just in case you ever forget it, 24 countries around the world that today run Home Starts. If you were to go to Australia, if you were to go to Japan, if you were to go to places like Tanzania and Uganda and France and Norway, you would see passionate people coming together to set up Home Starts that are looking very, very similar to what you do in your communities here and right across the UK. So if ever you are feeling slightly alone in running Home Start in your area, I promise you there is somebody somewhere else in the world running a Home Start who is dealing with exactly the same problem as you and has probably found the solution to it. One of the great things about being part of a federated structure that we never quite have managed to unlock yet, and I put yet very importantly at the end of that sentence, is the ability that we have to learn from each other right across the global phenomenon that has become Home Start for the benefit of ourselves as organisations and for the benefit of the families, children and volunteers that we support. Make no mistake, since 1973, Home Start has become something of a global social phenomenon and we should be rather proud of it. So make sure you wear that on your hearts and sleeves when you talk to people around your area about the reach and the difference that the charity, the tremendous charity that you are part of, actually makes. I think there's also a challenge for us as an organisation about our profile. You know, I think we're sort of one of the best kept secrets in the charity world. Something good about that. Think of all the potential that's there to make ourselves well known. But I think there's something about being part of a federal structure where we all kind of pass off the responsibility for raising our profile. Now, how many times have I, as Chief Executive of Home Start UK, been in a room where people say, oh, you don't do enough nationally to raise our profile? And how many times have I been in a room and I've seen a group of Home Starts who I know could do so much more to raise awareness of their profile locally. And I know this because I've run a local charity. And I know that to take a local charity from being unrecognised to having a profile that competes with your local hospice movement and others takes energy, it takes guts. It means getting out every single day on your social media and your great website, raising issues that affect your families. It means building relationships with the press and broadcasting media, your local social affairs correspondents. It means putting out press releases. It means never turning down a radio interview. It means making sure that you are there, articulately putting across the views of your families and your organisation at every single opportunity. Because I know that if you do that, your profile will rival the local hospice charities. And people will know about you in your communities. And at the point where you do that, and we respond to the challenge that you so eloquently give me to increase our profile nationally, I promise you that this organisation will not be the best kept secret in the charity world any longer, and that we will have a profile that matches the footprint that we have in terms of our support for families. And I think the other challenge related to that is we have to use our evidence better. So I've just been able to reel off a whole heap of statistics for you and a whole heap of impact measures for you in terms of the work that we do nationally. We have to find ways to be able to do that locally, for your areas, for you to be able to talk as confidently as I can nationally about the difference that you are making in your communities. Because that's what commissioners need to know. That's what your stakeholders need to know. It's what your funders need to know. And we have to find a way to work together in partnership to try and make that happen. One of the things that I often hear used about the voluntary sector is how communities come together to change the world. In fact, it was, as many of you know, the American cultural anthropologist, get my words right, anthropologist, Margaret Mead, who said very strikingly that we shouldn't ever underestimate the group of committed citizens, their power to change the world. And in some cases, I think that's poorly applied to voluntary organisations. In Home Start's case, I don't think it is. I think it's what you, your volunteers, your trustees, your stakeholders are involved with every single day in your work in your areas. In fact, I can't think of a better embodiment of Margaret Mead's sentiment than Home Start. And I think it's really important that when we're all together, we actually celebrate that fact. And we actually recognise the fact that right at the heart of Home Start is this central idea about community coming together to support families who are struggling in those communities. So let's not lose sight of that. Let's not lose sight of it as we begin to develop our expansive plans for partnerships and consortia working and even mergers and developments. Still at the heart of Home Start is this ability that we have to come together to transform the lives of families who are struggling in our communities. It's the heart of what the Home Start message was in 1973, and it should be the heart of our message in the future as well. Don't often get the chance to have all of you in a room together, and I think I'd like to finish by saying thank you. Thank you very much from somebody who gets to see and experience all the extraordinary work that Home Start does secondhand, and to represent us nationally to so many different audiences, to say thank you for that life-changing work that you do every single day with families in your communities. So whether you are a member of staff, whether you are a trustee, irrespective of what roles you have, I genuinely and sincerely mean that thanks, because actually if it wasn't for you, those 35,000 families would be not able to have the same kind of benefits that we know Home Start brings to their lives. We've got to sort out the challenge. I truly believe that for many of us, change or die is a very real challenge for 2015. But let's see if we can do it together, because the holy grail at the end of it is that more than 35,000 families will be supported in the future to the great extent that they are now. And there will be far fewer of the kind of people that I said to you right at the beginning, that I met at my local hospital, that I read about in my local paper, who have to go through or subject other people to extraordinarily awful things after it's all gone horribly wrong in their lives. So let's join together and be the time machines of the future that really make sure that today's generation of young people don't turn out to have problems in the future. And I know with the terrific support that you provide them with, that won't happen. Thank you.